So we have a lot of books. We've got 60 books to give away at the end of today. 30 from Will Hutton. He said you could buy his book. You don't have to buy his book. We've got 30 to give away when he does a signing. And we have 30 from this bloke, Neil Lawrence. And my nose wasn't at all out of joint after State of OpenCon, but people kept coming up to me and saying, who was that professor? He was the best speaker. So there is no pressure around it, but we do have the best speaker from State of OpenCon back again today to join us to talk about AI. Whether it was the subject matter, whether it was just his moment in time, I don't know. But I suspect what we'll see is that the Google DeepMind professor of ML from Cambridge, author of Atomic Human, Professor Neil Lawrence, probably is one of, if not the best speaker again today. And I know many of you are here specifically to see him. Neil, would you like to join us?
Gosh, that's pressure. Thank you. So what I'd like to do is just say a little bit about my book, The Atomic Human, and how it relates to what we're talking about today. So I'll talk about the central premise of the book, and then I'll talk about how that leads to, I think, a lot of the problems we're hearing about, and then I'll try and give us a sense of what this community has to do with solving those problems, which is everything. So the book doesn't really have solutions in it. It doesn't say that this is a solution. It doesn't say what the solutions are. And that's fundamentally because I'm kind of sick of people telling us what the solutions are when they have no idea of the problems. And the idea of the book is to empower individuals with confidence that, like we've just heard in the previous talk, that they are the ones who are aware of the problems, whether that's the heating engineer or the people that are putting the Raspberry Pi together, and that they need to be empowered to deliver those solutions themselves, whether that's through support and teaching about open source or whatever. But I'll start with the initial premise of the book. So the book is called The Atomic Human, Understanding Ourselves in the Age of AI. And the basic idea is what happens if we look at human cognition in the way Democritus looked at the atom. So Democritus, Greek philosopher, said, what happens if I take physical matter and I cut it in two? And I take one piece and I cut it in two again. And I keep doing that until I get to the point where I can no longer cut. Or do I get to that point? And the atomists in Greek philosophy believed you got to a point where you couldn't cut and that the world was made up of these atoms. And of course, we now use that concept in physics. Of course, we found out you can cut the atom. But the philosophical idea is here being applied to humans and our cognitive space. So the notion being, if every time we develop the computer to do something new that we used to think of as uniquely human, whether that's doing arithmetic, playing chess, having a conversation, it's cutting into who we are, does that process continue, or do you get to a point where you can't cut? And my answer is you do get to a point where you can't cut. And I mean, that's chapter 1 in the book. And I mean, there's two parts to that. One is our vulnerabilities, the fact that we're going to die, that we can lose people, et cetera, et cetera. But the other piece is sort of a very fundamental constraint around our information bandwidth. And that's the bit I'll sort of focus on for the purposes of what we're talking about now. So as individual human beings, the analogy I use in the book is that our intelligence is locked in. Locked in the manner of someone who can only wink to communicate. I tell the story of John Dominic Bowlby. So what do I mean by that? Well, someone who's paralyzed and can only wink to communicate seems like they're going to struggle to express their ideas. But when you look at their information transfer rate, it's only 300 times slower than me standing here talking to you. So yeah, sure, it would take me 300 times longer perhaps to give this talk if I was winking it at you than speaking it at you. But when we look at the computer and how its speed of communication, we see it's 300 million times faster than us. So when you're thinking about, I mean, these ridiculous things people are saying around intelligence, tech CEOs, all these sort of people talking about, oh, we're going to have AGIs that are orders of magnitude more intelligent than us. That's a poorly defined idea. That's kind of nonsense. How are they ranking intelligence? It doesn't make any sense. But for years, we've already had machines that can communicate in an absolute sense, information theory, very fundamental. Recently, 300 million times faster with 10 gigabit internet. With 1 gigabit, 30 million times faster. And this is what's making the difference. This is what's affecting society, not just now in the last 2 years when everyone started wetting themselves about ChatGPT, but before this, with social media and other forms of machine learning with relatively simple algorithmic decision-making systems that had access to enormous amounts of our data. So they don't have to be more intelligent than us if they're looking at quantities of data that are many, many millions of times. They're just greater than we can absorb. They can just absorb it in their own way. So the book starts with that sort of premise and then talks about what's remarkable about humans in terms of how we overcome this very odd constraint. What's fundamentally going on, we think at the speed of light, but we communicate at the speed of sound. The speed of light's a factor of 1 million faster. The fact that the computer's 300 million times faster is down to computer scientists and information theory people coming up with good coding algorithms, right? So, but that million's coming from speed of light communication. So that's there as a sort of fundamental limit, unless we start injecting our heads with Wi-Fi, but I don't think that's that doesn't change the nature of our intelligence, because it's involved with that. It's not like we constantly feel locked in like Bobby. Sometimes we feel people can't understand us. But we've evolved with this limitation. So a lot of the things around us, such as our culture, the way we have shared ideas, means that we normally don't have to communicate loads of things. So an example I use in the book is, if I walk into your shop and I say, this is a very nice shop, wouldn't it be a terrible thing if your window was to be smashed? Now, that's true, but you wouldn't think, oh, Neil's being very friendly and confirming what a terrible thing that would be. You would feel that's a threat, because I shouldn't need to say that, because that's part of our commonly accepted understanding. Now, the way we develop our commonly accepted understanding is through our culture, through sharing ideas, through things like books, through Will Hutton's book, through my book. These things become things that we can talk about and a shared form of the way we think about the world. Indeed, Thomas Kuhn, who looked at the sociology of science, a philosopher of science, had a whole sort of theory of science based around the progress in science occurs in waves known as paradigm shifts. And those paradigm shifts come about when we understand quantum mechanics or Einstein's theory of general relativity. And they represent a cultural break with our previous understanding. And the thing he points out is that our previous understanding, he wrote about this in the 1960s, is stored in books. So the first wave of science wrote these things in books such as Principia, Newton's great work, which was a paradigm shift. Yeah. But then later, it became stored in textbooks. So by the 19th century, he says it's textbooks that represent our understanding of the way the world works. That's, to some extent, our cultural mechanisms for talking about the way the world works. Books are a fundamental part of what we can all think of as our information topography. And the invention of the printing press was totally vital in sharing everyone's ability to access culture and to make decisions. The original people who could write, the scribes, the people who first understood how to read and write, going all the way back to 3,500 BC, what did they originally write about? They wrote down accounts, they wrote legal judgments, they wrote down civil administration decisions. They became incredibly powerful because they were controlling the movement of information. Now, with that power came responsibilities. And over time, the professions emerged, whether that's accountant or lawyer, medical doctor. Each of these groups are people who have greater knowledge, access to more knowledge, and basically are responsible for looking after us in some sense. Their asymmetry of knowledge means that when they make decisions about us financially, medically, legally, they have obligations associated with their professions. So what is the modern information topography. What is the modern way that we record scientific understanding? Where is it? What is the modern system of accountancy? What is the modern way that we're trying to fix net zero? Is it in books? Is it accessible to regular people in a handwritten way? No. It's the digital computer. And everything we just heard about in the previous discussion showed what the challenges there are, because when you want to solve a problem like net zero, you need to bridge from your understanding of plumbing into the digital world. Who owns that digital world? Who's the modern guilds, the modern scribes? Software engineers and big tech companies. So what we've done is we've constructed a world where the people who control the modern information infrastructure no longer have the responsibilities that go along with that information infrastructure. Software engineers are not burdened by the responsibilities that lawyers, accountants, civil administrators, they're not burdened by these additional moral duties that we impose on them in society. So what is the fix? It's in this room. It's in these three principal pillars of the OpenUK Manifesto. Education on open source is about empowering individuals. Those wonderful stories we were hearing about people who carry out their job on a daily basis, and in their evenings, they're writing open source code. They are doing it for fun, but they're also doing it in the knowledge that it's going to make their job tomorrow easier to have that piece of code, whether it's an open source database, whether it's an open source machine learning. That is the building block on which they are building their business. They know that these communal efforts help, but only a few people are able to participate. And currently, as we've heard from Will, our government doesn't understand the utility and value of this. I was reflecting on some of the things that were being said about Tech Week, and it's appalling misrepresentation of where the UK's ecosystem is strongest, which is not among the shallow, weak tech entrepreneurs who can only do things such as, I've created an app on the mobile phone that allows people to sell tickets. It's in the depth of our expertise, in deep tech, in things like machine learning, in things like artificial intelligence, in understanding how we can deploy these technologies with open EHR within our health service. Those are the people that are not being celebrated in these events. You are the people that are not being celebrated in these events. I was wondering why that is. What is it about Silicon Valley that can celebrate that, whereas we can't? And I did wonder, maybe the problem is Silicon Valley is a long way away from New York. Well, that's their advantage. So you don't get the hangers-on, the financial hangers-on who want to profit from this. You get the people who are passionate about technology, passionate about bringing change in the way that Will spoke about. Those are the ones that are leading the conversation. And in the UK, that's just not happening. But this is the place where we can start to bring about that change, because the benefits outlined in the manifesto are real. And they only need to be deployed sensitively with support, with the expertise we were hearing about missing from the last deployment. Just a little bit of help, just a little bit of government convening, just a little bit of government willingness to listen and understand and bring the experts on board and talk to those experts before running another scheme. It doesn't cost a lot of money. In fact, it costs less money if you bring in the outsiders and listen to what they say. I'll finish with a little story that I was thinking about on the bike recently. It's not in the book. The book's filled with silly stories. But it's the following story that was coming from, someone said to me, oh, well, when you're building these things, it sounds like you're building the Tower of Babel. You know, this is the problem you face, like a big software project. It's like the Tower of Babel. That's what the Mythical Man Month is all about. as you build a larger and larger software project, you all lose the ability to understand each other. You're not sharing a shared language. And because you can't understand what King Nimrod is telling you to do anymore, you're all building in different directions and no one can even see the result and the whole thing falls down. It's not God, it's just the mythical man-month challenges around communication that cause the tower to fail. But the open source community has the key for finishing the Tower of Babel. It doesn't matter what you do to that community in terms of teaching them different languages or bringing different cultures. In fact, that makes that community stronger because they understand more perspectives. They understand what the heating engineer wants. They understand what the government wants. They understand what every individual wants out of this software product. And they can do that because in the open source community, you sit down and talk about what you are building before you start. You build your shared goals, you sit down, you agree what you're doing, if it's a community build, and what the modification is, and why it should be there. The sort of thing that companies hate. Just get on with it, they say. Come on, define your goals and go for it. And that's the strength of the open source community. And if deployed properly in the areas we're talking about, that can be the strength of the UK and of our government and of our education system, that we realize that bringing these different voices to the conversation, it may require more effort at convening at the beginning, but it does mean everyone knows what they're doing, and it doesn't matter that they're from different cultures and different languages, they're working towards a shared goal, and they can construct that tower for a hell of a lot less money than any business can build these software products. And that's why that works. We have to deliver that message to government because the problem we're facing at the moment is similar to the problem we're facing with climate. We are an unpriced externality. We seem to be free. There doesn't seem to have any investment in us. Just like you don't have to invest in the atmosphere. You can suck it up and blow it out with a load of carbon dioxide and no one charges you. You can suck up the open source community, blow it out. You're not even mentioned by those tech CEOs when they're all celebrating the great achievements of their companies, which are all utterly founded on open source software. We have to change that way of thinking within the people here who are making those decisions. And if we do that, everything else will follow. You just have to stick to what you're trying to achieve, which is trying to work out the best thing that you can do for building software to solve the problems you're interested in, and we're all working together to construct, I don't know, it's not a Tower of Babel, that's the wrong fable here, a foundation on which the sort of society Will was talking about can be constructed. And I'll end there. Thank you.